Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another town hall gathering from the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. Tonight, we're going to hear from a very experienced and skilled group of individuals about disabilities, especially disabilities and the Black community. It's a topic we've never talked about, so this is a good entrance for us to begin this discussion. It is bad enough to experience racism, poverty, low employment, and housing issues, but it is tragic and worse to add one or more disabilities to the list of challenges, which is a traditional occurrence for African Americans. According to one survey, 14% of all Black Americans have a disability, compared to 12.6% of the overall population. Our panelists may be able to give you more accurate statistics than that, but that's the one that I came across. It is unfortunate that even in the broader Black community, given the historical and ongoing presence of other inequities, that the need to recognize and provide for those with disabilities is not always seen as a priority. Too often we see the disabled person as a burden rather than an individual entitled to equality and resource equity. Black Americans have always been considered, quote, less than. So imagine how the disabled Black American is defined and considered by those who are able to secure equality and equity for all. I wonder about those days when the Constitution said that we were only 3/5 human. What would a disabled Black person be? The data tells a story of our neglect as a nation to those who are disabled, despite the enactment of legislation since the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the American Disabilities Act of 1990. Local jurisdictions have been able to thwart the original intent of federal law. Here are just a few little statistics, and then I'm going to turn it over. For the more than 1 million Black students with disabilities in grades K through 12, the deck is really stacked against them. 85% of youth in juvenile detention centers have disabilities. Overall, only 67% of students with disabilities graduate from high school, compared to 85% of students without disabilities. For those adults entering prison, the disability rate is extremely high. In a society that believes in success through competition or independent ambition, or the old adage, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we must all recognize the impossibility of this mission for the millions of disabled men, women, and youth without legislative, financial, education, and many other community supports. I look forward to hearing from our well-informed panelists tonight more about the cause, effect, and possible solutions so that we can all work on the issue of equity and equality for the large number of disabled Americans, and predominantly, especially Black Americans who have to deal with the other challenges that have always existed within the Black community. So let me turn it over to Curt Jones, who is the producer of our town halls as chair of our outreach committee, and he will introduce our panel and introduce Hope Vella, who was instrumental in starting this topic with us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to July's town hall for the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. This is just a phenomenal topic that just does not get enough attention. And so we have a great cast of speakers that are all brilliant in their own fields. And so I want to kind of run down who our speakers are and who and what they do. And so our first speaker tonight is Hope Vella, and she is a national disability advocate, mentor, trainer, and she provides organizational support and accommodation arrangements for event attendees who have disabilities. She has her associate's degree in human services and a bachelor's degree in social work, and will be working on her master's in social work this coming fall. And so Hope is her topic. She's going to introduce us to disabilities, because disabilities, we quite frequently assume them to be just physical, and the actual definition is much more broad and inclusive. So she will go into details about that. We have two speakers today from the Community Legal Aid Society, or CLA.S.I. We have Lisa Furber, and she's been with CLA.S.I. for 23 years. She's a non-attorney paralegal. She has earned her bachelor's degree in legal studies from Wesley College, a master's in administration of human services from Wilmington University, and we're grateful that she can be here, as well as Joann Kingsley, who also is also from CLA.S.I. And she is a representative from the Disability Law Program, or DLP. And CLA.S.I.'s mission is to combat injustice through creative and persistent civil legal advocacy on behalf of vulnerable and underserved Delawareans. So these two speakers will give us a lot of great detail. We do have Shannon Wright, and he has been working for the last 5 years as an academic counselor from Del Tech Community College. He works as a disability support counselor advisor at Del Tech. And what's interesting about this is that a lot of Black students, unfortunately, throughout the United States and including Delaware, are often singled out and punished is not the right word, but singled out and given attention to, and quite often put into special needs classes when they don't really need that. And so one of the things that Shannon will do is that, and his team, is that they cover a wide range of services for folks who are labeled as disabled, and they can help them overcome and work through and actually have transformed lives this way. So it's a second chance for a lot of students who struggled through in high school. And then we have Davon MarqueHall, and he's a populations housed in corrections facilities. He's also the author of the book, Keep Up the Good Fight, The Untold Story of Unknown Athlete Activist. So he himself is a community activist and an advocate for what he will call most vulnerable people. He's a recipient of the global recognition as a Universal Peace Federation ambassador. And then he is also a member of the Delaware Voting Rights Coalition Access for Democracy, as well as a member of the Multi-Faith EMI. And so he's going to, discuss with us about disabilities in prisons, in our prison populations, and how they're at disadvantage, especially with our Black folk. So we just have an amazing group of speakers tonight. So I hope you enjoy, and Hope, I pass it off to you. Thank you so much for organizing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Curt, and thank you, Ms. Charlotte. I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation.
Thank you.
And can you hear me okay?
We hear you very clearly, Hope.
All right, thank you. And I need to move this. All right, so we're going to start off with the definition of disability. With the definition of disability. The ADA defines disability as, or the Americans with Disabilities Act defines a person with a disability as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. They have a history or a record of such an impairment, such as cancer that is in remission, or the person is perceived by others as having such an impairment, such as a person who has scars from a severe burn. Throughout this webinar, we will be, when we speak about people with disabilities, it is inclusive. That is physical, and that is also cognitive and mental health disabilities. They are equal. Major life activities that we're discussing are caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, learning, and working. Now, disability is intersectional. That means that disability transcends several areas. So it transcends population. So there's disability in race, age, And with age, it could be someone that has a developmental disability that they're born with or that they get before they turn 18, or an acquired disability. For people such as me that just have an accident happen and they acquire the label of disability. It transcends gender, religion, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation. Disability does not only impact whether a person can get in and out of a establishment. It impacts a person's education and opportunities for education, transportation, employment, housing, recreation, and mental health. Prevalence nationally, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 26% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. In Delaware, it's 24%. That means 1 in 4 people at any event that you go to could have a disability. We don't see them out, but we're here. In the Black community, nationally, there's a 13.9% of prevalence in the Black community. In Delaware, it's 7% higher at 20.5%. Now, one of the issues is that we have a tendency to look at disability through a medical model as something that needs to be fixed. The most attention is to why the person has the disability. They have measures that are standard, they're concrete. The experts are physicians and scientists, and they define the level of disability, and they focus on the anatomical and physiological focus. They also focus on the pathology, the reason it happened, and the words abnormality and deviance. The model that I'm campaigning for people to start looking at more is at the socio-political model. In this model, disability is a collective societal concern because at some point, disability will touch us all, whether it's a family member as a caregiver, whether you have a child that that is born with a disability, or you acquire one of your own. It's the opposite of the biomedical model. Prejudice and discrimination are causal factors of disability. In other words, the disability is already there, but because of prejudice and discrimination, it adds extra obstacles and challenges to the person having successful outcomes. Disability has civil rights. We don't want charity or pity. That a society should be accommodating of our disabilities, and the societal political model recognizes intersectionality in disability. In other words, that it crosses into every people group in our country. This model considers the causation of increased concentrations in minority populations, and this is what got my attention to trying to discover if it was equal in the Delaware communities, and that disability is a social and political construction just as race is. Language, just as language has changed in discussing race, it has changed in how we discuss disability. Words that we no longer use are handicapped, disabled, crippled, lame, afflicted, stricken, invalid, infirm. Learning you don't say a person is learning disabled, you would say the person has a learning disability. A person is not autistic, a person has been diagnosed with autism. And I ask people not to use the word retarded unless they are in the medical field and they are talking about a medical condition of the person's physiology or progress. We don't use the words crazy, insane, spastic, or manic. A person is not confined to a wheelchair. A person is not wheelchair bound. The person uses a mobility device. Person is not nonverbal, mute, or dumb. A person does not have a fit. The person has a seizure. We don't use the words normal, average, special needs because people with disabilities have the same needs as everybody, the need to belong. They may require accommodations, but the basic needs are the same. We're not, people with disabilities are not victims and they are not vegetables. So the terminology that we use that gives dignity and respect to the person with the disability is person with disabilities, individual with disabilities, person diagnosed with a disability, a person has a mental health condition, they may be in crisis, they may be experiencing an episode. The person uses a mobility device. A person communicates by using sign language, cued speak, or a communication device, notepads, blinks, etc. There is etiquette within the disability community. Ask if you can help. Respect the answer given. If assistance is accepted, allow the individual to guide you in the best way to assist them. Never touch an individual's assistive device without permission. I explain to people that it is as intimate as touching a part of that person's body. A wheelchair is there to act as that person's legs. If you wouldn't touch the person's legs, don't touch their wheelchair. Sit at eye level when speaking to a person who is using a wheelchair or scooter. Speak to the person, not their interpreter or their companion if they are deaf or are hard of hearing. As far as how they refer to themselves, if they refer to themselves as deaf, if they refer to themselves as autistic, you refer to them and give them the same way, giving them self-determination. They identify how they want to identify. Include them in your activities, encourage participation, allow for self-determination, and expect that persons with disabilities are included in whatever spaces that you inhabit, and encourage and promote inclusivity. You have a right as a person with disabilities to attend public functions, events, and activities with accommodations provided. Some accommodations that are found in places in Delaware and in the parks, wheelchair accessible paths, canoe, kayak launches, fishing piers, beaches, beach access mats. There's also a place in Lewis called Mason's Mission that has beach wheelchairs that you can rent. Some are the higher up and some take you lower down into the water, and they only take donations. For concerts, designated seating, interpreter services, and designated entry. Restaurants, accessible passage, seating and restrooms. Theaters, seating, auditory devices, captioning. Museums, the same. Transportation, there's public transportation, ride sharing, and transportation for medical appointments. And I'm going to stop there and pass it back to Curt.
Thank you, Hope, for that wonderful explanation. And what I appreciated is from my own education and training, I was trained to use the term special needs, and you showed us like there's a better term out there. So it was always an opportunity to learn. So appreciate that, and thank you for breaking things down for us. Our next guest that we have is going to be Lisa Furber, who's going to talk about DLP Clients Assistance Program with C.L.A.S.I. So please, Lisa, if you will begin.
Thank you so much, and good evening to everybody. I'm really glad to be here. I do not have a PowerPoint to share with you today. I thought I would just talk and relay the information that way. And I want to start by just sharing some brief information about Community Legal Aid Society Incorporated. Also, you'll hear us refer to it as C.L.A.S.I. We are a private nonprofit law firm, and we provide free civil legal services to people who live in our community who meet certain eligibility requirements. The C.L.A.S.I is, again, in all 3 counties, and we have offices in Wilmington, an office in Dover, and an office in Georgetown. We have 6 different programs within C.L.A.S.I. Those include the Housing and Fair Housing Program. That program focuses their work on keeping people housed and preventing evictions, as well as assisting people with reasonable accommodations as it relates to housing. We have an immigration program. We have several medical legal partnership programs. We have a public benefits unit and program. We have an elder law program. And then we have the disabilities law program, which is where I work, as well as my colleague Joann, who will speak a little later. The disabilities law program is the designated protection and advocacy agency for the state of Delaware. Each state and US territory has a designated protection and advocacy agency. And each of the P&As, as we call them, because we like our acronyms, we have 9 different protection and advocacy programs. I'm going to share what the other 8 programs are and then tell you more about the client assistance program. So the first protection and advocacy program is called PAD. That stands for Protection and Advocacy for Developmental Disabilities. This advocacy program focuses on providing legal representation, both individual and systemic advocacy for individuals who acquired their disability before the age of 21. We have a program called PAMI that stands for Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness. This advocacy program focuses on protecting individuals who have a serious and persistent mental illness, regardless of whether they're living in the community or they are currently in a facility or a hospital setting. They focus on helping individuals remain free from abuse, neglect, mistreatment, and financial exploitation. Next is the PAIR program. That stands for Protection and Advocacy for Individual Rights. This program is kind of a catch-all program. So this will cover anyone who has a disability after the age of 21 that's not a mental illness, and they've acquired it. The next program is called PAT, Protection and Advocacy for Assistive Technology. This program focuses heavily on helping individuals with disabilities acquire assistive technology, such as communication devices, wheelchairs, ramps, modifications in the homes. We also have 2 programs funded by the Social Security Administration. The first is Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries of Social Security. This particular advocacy program focuses on individuals who are receiving SSI or SSDI and they want to return to work, but they have barriers to employment. The second Social Security related advocacy program is Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries with Representative Payees. A representative payee is a person or an organization that manages the beneficiary's money for them. And that program is focused on ensuring that individuals are not being financially exploited by their payee. We also have a protection and advocacy program for individuals with traumatic brain injury. And just as that says, the focus there is for anyone with a traumatic brain injury. My colleague Joann is going to talk about PAVA, which is Protection and Advocacy for Voting Accessibility. I may have gotten that one wrong. Joann will correct me. And the final and newest protection and advocacy program is called the Client Assistance Program. And that's where I work. And before I talk more about CAP, I want to just say that I think what we need to do in our community is have a paradigm shift and focus on thinking about people with disabilities and that they can work, instead of assuming that because they are a person with a disability, they can't work. And the Client Assistance Program is available to help individuals who want to obtain, maintain, or regain employment. So more specifically, individuals who are receiving services from the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation or the Division from the Visually Impaired, their vocational rehabilitation program. The Client Assistance Program can help them navigate through those services. If they have any challenges to receiving the services, if their plan for employment is not all inclusive, they might have some concerns with their counselor that needs some mediation or negotiation, and the Client Assistance Program is available to help them. In addition to that, the Centers for Independent Living in Delaware, the Client Assistance Program can help individuals who are receiving services from them, and they may have concerns about those services. And the final thing that the Client Assistance Program can do is provide information and advice about Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that is the section related to employment discrimination. And a couple final thoughts that I wanted to share. CAP can do lots and lots of things to help with employment efforts for people with disabilities. We can give information about your rights. We can provide information and referral to benefits planning. If individuals have criminal backgrounds that need expungements or pardons, we can provide referrals to that. We can assist with appeals if they receive a decision from DVR that they don't like. We can explain the law, their policies and rules, and we can advocate for needed services. And the final thing I wanted to share tonight is how important and these services and programs are. I have a personal connection to DVR. My husband is a person with a disability, and he was able to take advantage of services through DVR. Prior to doing that, he was on Social Security disability insurance, and he successfully completed his individualized plan for employment with DVR. He's been employed for the last 13 years. He no longer receives benefits, and it's really been a powerful and impactful process in my family and in my life, and I want to be able to share that and help others with that. So that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Lisa. Greatly appreciate the extensive breakdown of what CLASI does. And just for the audience, two things. One, there will be a question and answer session at the end. So if you have questions, please write them down or post them through the chat, and we will have discussions about those. Secondly, that while our focus is on the impact of Black folk who suffer from the various disabilities that Hope broadly defined for us, there is obviously, when Black folk are impacted, there are obviously going to be a lot of other people as well, the populations that will be impacted. So just wanted to make that clear. Moving on to our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Shannon Wright from Deltech Community College. Shannon, please present.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Shannon Wright, and I'm the Disability Support Counselor at the Georgetown campus. So first, since I'm presenting on higher education, I want to share some of the programs and studies that we have at Delaware Tech, and then I'll transition into the disabilities part. So of course, when I meet with students, and particularly in the area high schools, students with IEPs or 504 plans, I ask them, what is their motivation to seeking higher education, and that's important to find a good fit for them. And we offer here at Delaware Tech offer over 100 credit programs, associate's degrees to bachelor's degrees in nursing, and then also in education, and then certificates. These programs that we have here, they usually last between 2 to upwards of, it could be 5 years, because some of our programs are competitive admissions, such as the allied health and nursing programs. And then on the other side, we have our workforce development program, workforce development and community education. And those programs are short certificate programs, and like allied health, like a certified medical assistant, phlebotomy, or if someone's interested in heavy equipment operator or welding, stuff like that. So those programs are designed to get people the education that they need and get straight into the workforce. So that's one of the first things that I assess with students. What is your motivation and what are you interested in, just to make that good fit there. So once we identify that that program or certificate that they want to pursue, and it's a student that has a disability, you will engage in an interactive process to learn what accommodations that they need to have equal access to their courses. So at the college level, the laws are different that govern the laws at the secondary level. At the secondary level, the Individuals with Disability Education Act governs the IEP, and then Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act subpart D governs the 504 plans there. And at the post-secondary level, the Americans with Disability Act, and then also Section 504 subpart E governs the accommodations or reasonable academic adjustments at the college level. And the goal of the reasonable accommodations at the college level is to make sure that students have equal access to their courses. And of course, the goal at the secondary level with IDEA is to make sure that students are successful and have a successful progression. So another thing that I do with students and parents is educate on that difference, just to make that transition a little bit smoother. So, and of course, we're focusing on the Black community. So I do encourage, all students to self-disclose, because they do need to do that in order to receive accommodations at the post-secondary level. And then, I frame it as instead of a disability being a taboo, it's a part of diversity. And, someone's disability or impairment makes a community stronger. And at Delaware Tech, that's who we are. We're a community first, and then a college second. So a diverse community makes the college stronger, and then also makes the community stronger. So that's one thing that I try to emphasize and encourage all students, but particularly, African-American students or minorities, to reach out and then self-advocate and get the help that they need to make sure that they do have equal access to their courses, so that they can enjoy the education that they're receiving without barriers. And just hopping off what Hope was talking about, the social model of a disability. I view that as people are disabled by barriers in society, such as their attitudinal or a physical barrier or ableism, and not necessarily their impairment or differences that they may have. So that's where accommodations come into play. And, if we need to change our policies and procedures to make sure that student has equal access to their courses, the same as their non-disabled peers, that's what we'll do. And as long as the accommodation doesn't fundamentally alter a course. Okay. So some of the accommodations that are granted at the post-secondary level are listed here. So accessible furniture, assistive listening device, Clearview lip reading, course reductions, which do not fundamentally alter the nature of the program, or substitution, early access to course syllabus, large print handouts, note taker scribe, priority seating, ASL interpreter, tape recording lectures, visual media. It could be extended test time, which is probably the most popular accommodation that I grant. So extended test time on all time exams, tests, and quizzes. But a student can request any accommodation, and I have to take it in individualized consideration. And as long as it doesn't create a fundamental alteration to the course or causes a direct threat to the student or others, or causes an undue burden, then we're going to modify our policies and procedures and put that accommodation in place. So I never say no to a student when they ask for accommodation. I vet the process out, and I'll come back with a objective justification for approving or denying it. And if it's not approved, then we come up with an alternative for the student there. Yeah. So, and of course, Hope, as was mentioned earlier, she's a alumni of the college and a great advocate for students with disabilities in higher education. And she does, and even though she doesn't like it, but she does inspire me. So thank you for all that you do and for putting this on here. Any questions right now, or we're going to take those later?
Yeah, we will take those at the end, and there are a couple. So thank you.
All right. I'll stop sharing. My pleasure.
All right, thank you. All right, next up, we'd like to introduce Joann Kingsley. She is our second speaker from C.L.A.S.I. So Joann has a PowerPoint presentation to review with us.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you to the Alliance for inviting us on this important topic. Again, as I've been introduced a few times, my name is Joann. I work with C.L.A.S.I. in the Disabilities Law Program in what we call PAVA, or Protection and Advocacy for Voting Access. And Hope has heard me say too many times that access has become my middle name, because we all hear about the rights that we have on paper. But if you can't access those rights, if you can't operationalize them, they're meaningless. And so elections have meant a lot to me from the time I was a very young person, and I've participated in elections around the world. I've seen Afghan women vote for the first time in their lives, and see people be killed for the attempt to vote. And so I take it very personally when people think voting's not important, or that they don't matter, or that their vote doesn't matter. And so for me, this job to ensure access has been educational, but also I've become, well, you can tell Lisa, or Lisa sees it all the time at work, that, you know, everybody I talk to, I can't see now, I can't not see all the things that inhibit access to the elections. And so we've written a pretty strong report to the Department of Elections about all the shortfalls and what has to be corrected. So let me back up a little bit. My job, as Lisa was saying, we have a lot of different grants that cover different kinds of programs. And the grant that covers mine actually has me split in two ways. 80% of my time is spent on voting access. And the other 20% is spent on individual cases in our PAD group, or the developmental disabilities area. And I work specifically with an attorney who focuses on children whose disability was acquired before age 22. And it's focused mostly on education, on things like IEPs and 504s, with the objective being that this child gets the best possible education, and that they are given the resources they need to achieve everything that they're capable of. And what they call an LRE, in the least restrictive environment. I mean, always to the extent possible, we want kids to be together and to learn together. But for a parent who, you know, finds out their child has some kind of a learning disability, it can be pretty overwhelming. It's like, so what do I do now? So a lot of our work is about helping with that sort of advice, guidance, resources. You know, what do you do? There are lots of resources, and we're always frustrated that people don't seem to know we're out there. And so I'm always saying, you know, give us a call. We have lots of resources. We can't solve every problem, but we do have a lot of people who are skilled in these topics, and we love to help people. It's why we do what we do. So for people who, if you yourself have a disability and you're a young person still in school, or if you have a child in school and you're struggling, their IEP isn't being implemented in the way that you feel is correct, or there need to be changes, they're being bullied, if they're being harassed, if any of these things are happening, you have rights as the parent, and the child has rights. Regardless, disability doesn't take away your rights. But I think it makes it more difficult for the person with a disability to access those rights. So we're there to ensure that those rights are preserved. And when they're not, we're there to assist. Of course, elections only happen more or less every 2 years. And so a lot of people say, oh, wow, you're lucky. You know, you only work in November and then you have the rest of the year off. I wish that was true. There's so much to be done. The barriers to the franchise, to voting, are too many to mention, unfortunately. You can find our report online, and we'll give you links to all of that. Let me show you a little bit of what we're talking about. Doesn't want to share my screen. Let's see. There, okay. So yeah, I've already introduced myself so that you know what we're doing. And my screen doesn't want to go. Okay. When it boils all down to it, without getting into too many details, the whole point is that regardless of whether you have a disability or not, you have to have the same opportunity for access and participation as anyone else. Yeah, and that's a high threshold that hasn't been met for a long time. And so we keep hammering away at it, but it needs to come from many sides, as much from the voters themselves. I know a lot of people with disabilities who have attempted to vote in person and found it so difficult or so frustrating or so humiliating that they left without voting. And that's a shame. I hate to see that sort of thing happen. And so I'm doing everything in my power to make things better and to educate both the Department of Election, the volunteers who work there, and the voters themselves about how important it is to report these things even ahead of time. Like if it happened last time, you say, you know what, I went last time, it was terrible, I'm never going again. call us, tell us which location it was, what was wrong. Because I make a full report of every single one of these places and tell them, you know, you don't have parking. The door doesn't open enough. The door's not wide enough. You don't have this, you're missing that. We provide every bit of that detail. And the pressure needs to come on your elected officials, on the Department of Elections, on us who are your advocates by state mandate. And so, you know, reach out. This is a right that's too important to let go. People have talked about numbers and statistics. I'm fond of repeating, people with disabilities are the largest minority in this country. There is no other minority group larger than that, and it's roughly over 25%. And so imagine if all voters with disabilities voted, they absolutely have the power to change outcomes, to change laws, to decide who gets elected and who doesn't. And so it's a power that unfortunately has been diluted because of access issues. And so, yeah, this is just something I believe very passionate about. And when we talk about the right to vote, if we talk about voting in person at the polling station, you have the right to vote privately and independently, whether you're at home or at the polling station. You have the right to the polling place being accessible. In other words, there has to be accessible parking. The route to the door has to be accessible. The door has to be wide enough to get in. It has to open for you. The machine itself has to be accessible, and we'll talk a little bit about that. If you want help from someone, you get to bring the person of your choice, whoever you want. It just can't be your boss or your union rep, because that could look like you were being influenced. And if you didn't bring anyone and you need help, the polling staff are there to do that. And of course, the right to dignity and respect throughout the process should be a given, and it hasn't been. And so this is something, you know, I'm working on training the poll workers and Department of Elections on these kinds of things as well, along with disability etiquette and many of the things that Hope mentioned in her presentation. I want to make a note about people who have guardians. There is a common myth, a mistaken belief that if you have a guardian, you don't have the right to vote. That's incorrect. You do have the right to vote, even if you have a guardian. And the guardian doesn't get to tell you how to vote, when to vote, for whom to vote. They have no say in any matter over your vote if you have a guardian. The only way your right to vote can be taken away is by a signed order from a judge. That is the only person that can take that away. And it's only done in very rare cases where it's determined that the person simply doesn't have the mental ability to understand what's happening and to make a decision. So very rarely occurs. There's nobody else that can take it away. I don't care what the polling worker says to you, or the person at the door, or an elected official, or your family. No one has the right to take your access to the vote away. Absolutely no one. I tell people, if you get to the polls and they don't let you vote, call us. We run a hotline all day long on election day, comes straight to my desk, and we have lawyers on standby waiting to fix problems. So I tell them, don't leave without voting. Just a quick picture of our new machines that have a lot of new accessibility features. Finally, the old machines were not accessible at all. These screens are big, they're 32 inches, and kind of like your phones, you know, you can pinch them or take them apart and make the screen and the letters bigger. So if you're low vision or have blindness, you can make it easier to read. You can also change it to black and white if you need that sort of contrast for your vision. If you have blindness or you can't read, don't know how to read, you can also listen to the ballot with headphones. The keypad that you see on the right, for people with low vision, they're large buttons with bright colors. For people with no vision at all, they're also in Braille. And so is the machine. Where you put your voting card is in Braille. You're guided with audio on what to do. And you can ask for help at any point, but the curtain is closed. No one is seeing what you're voting. It is your privacy, your independent vote, and nobody has the right to look in on you or to change that. As noted before, we have offices in all 3 counties. We have been around in Delaware for 75 years. We're not going anywhere. We just keep getting bigger. In fact, we just keep adding more and more programs and more staff. I think, Lisa, we're up to 90, maybe? We started off with like a dozen. So I I wish we didn't need all of this, but we are a resource and we are free. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Obviously, we can't fix every problem, but we can give really good advice, give you the resources that you need to make a better decision, and to see disability as an obstacle, but not an insurmountable one. I participate on the planning committee for something called the LIFE Conference. Many of you may be familiar with it. Delaware has had the LIFE Conference, which is an all-day affair that, well, COVID made it virtual for a while, dedicated strictly to people with disabilities in Delaware and their needs from A to Z. It's back on again in January, in person at the Bally's. And the LIFE, I mean, the letters LIFE stand for something else, but this year we've kind of taken on the sort of a motto that LIFE stands for living informed and feeling empowered. I mean, that's my biggest wish for people with disabilities who would like to vote but have been disenfranchised by frustration or difficulties or exclusion. Take back your power. It's a huge power to have, and if we can persuade everyone to do this, you know, as 1 in 4 adults in Delaware has a disability. We are many, and so it's a power that it hasn't been sufficiently used, and I would love to see more people involved. By all means, reach out to us. We're on all kinds of social media. We tell about our programs there, but you can always call us. So thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you, Joann. Appreciate the deep dive into what you do, and we have several questions for you and for Lisa that will come to after our next speaker, Davon McMurray, who's going to talk to us about disability in correctional facilities and some of the experiences that has awareness to. So, thank you, Davon. Please speak.
I'm thankful to be here. I want to just thank all the other speakers. I want to thank all the other panelists. I'm looking forward to answering any questions at the end. I have some questions myself for you guys, and I'm looking forward to that. I did talk with Hope earlier today about some of the numbers, about some important numbers that deal with people incarcerated here in Delaware. And I went online, I went to doc.delaware.gov, and they keep track of the number of people that are incarcerated. And of course, they don't use the language that we should use when it comes to people. They don't use that people first language. It says number of inmates. The number of inmates, it says right now, is 3,463 people in confinement, locked up, behind bars, 3,000. On pretrial detention, meaning they haven't actually been to court yet, they haven't been proven guilty of a crime, it's 1,271 people. The number of offenders, that's what they call people that offended, on probation, that's 10,413 people on probation. So all these people on probation until Senate Bill 180, which our Senator Kyle Evans-Gay, who's a woman, Kyle Evans-Gay, she's from Wilmington, she's from up here where I'm at, and she's an attorney, she's smart. Kyle Evans-Gay wrote this legislation for people on probation, these 10,000 people in Delaware on probation, to be able to vote. Mrs. Kingsley, I work with her with the Delaware Voting Rights Coalition, it's volunteer work. ACLU, Delaware put this together. Everybody that wants to do anything about voting rights can be a part of this group. There are members from the League of Women Voters. There's members from NAACP. There's members from the Divine Nine. There's members from all over Delaware that are part of the Delaware Voting Rights Coalition. That organization is key. The Delaware Center for Justice is a part of the organization. When it comes to letting people know that they have the right inside to be a part of this democracy that we care so much about, including people with disabilities that are inside, because people that are locked up include women. People that are locked up include people with all kinds of different learning disabilities that ended up where they shouldn't have been because they didn't have anywhere else to go. A lot of folks don't subscribe or identify as disabled. And when you don't and you end up in jail, it's not an automatic thing that you're going to be treated like somebody that has a problem. You're gonna be treated like trash, just like everybody else that gets thrown in jail. I'm gonna say it plainly like that, because our population of people, Black people that don't have money, don't have means, don't have education, end up in this rut. And we know the problems, but I'm going to go back to the numbers. 953 people, not offenders, but people, are on pretrial detention within the community. So these are people waiting for trial, they bailed out. And it even says the number of people released. All these numbers that I mentioned, you guys, are in the thousands. The number of people released in the past 24 hours, 5. One hand, 5 people. So you're held on to. And once you get out, whether you got a disability or not, no matter what the crime is that you've committed, it's on your record. If it's a felony, if it's one that has to do with just something that had to do with poverty, something to do with trying to make money, something to do with maybe selling drugs or something like that, where you're trying to feed your family, whatever it is that you're trying to do, we know it's not right. But you end up having this felony on your record. I forged prescriptions back when I was younger, when I was dumber, when I had some skill on the computer and I thought, okay, I can make these prescriptions. And then I could go and I could get the medication. I could sell the pills because people are addicted to them. People are paying money for them, and it's something that I'm always going to be able to make money with. They're gonna pay for this drug. I didn't have sense, but I knew that I needed money, and I saw that as a way of making money when I was sitting there waiting for the doctor to print me out a prescription. I had never seen a prescription come out of a printer before. When I saw that, I felt like it was something I could do. Now, because I have a forgery on my record for printing these prescriptions out and selling these pills, I can't get it automatically expunged. It's not something that just goes away. It's not something that CL.A.S.I is able to make just go away. It's not something that DCJ is able to make go away. It's not something that the ACLU is able to make go away. It's not something that the state of Delaware has made go away. I think a governor's pardon maybe, and just everybody working together to make sure that it goes away. But it's a fight, and you're fighting by yourself a lot of times if you don't have the connections that I had. I'm thankful for the people in my life. I'm thankful for the church. I'm thankful for God put me where I needed to be. My coach, I'm a boxer, and my first boxing coach back in the day got me to go to church, and that led me to political activism. That led me down to Dover. That led me to trying to do things for people that I do see as the most vulnerable people, but the MVPs really the most valuable people, the people that don't get the credit, don't get the benefit of the doubt, don't always get looked at as people. The very insignificant people, the very irrelevant people, the V.I.Ps, the very important people, the very impactful people, the very impacted people, the very hurt by a system that is capitalistic and it puts profit over us. It puts profit over our babies, young people coming into this world, this ecologically devastated world, this environmentally damaged world because of corporations, because of dollars, the forever chemicals that they're drinking when they go to the water fountain. There's kids with kidney stones now. There's kids that are drinking lead in Delaware at schools, and they're not telling us. So the most vulnerable people, when I think about God, because God is real, when I think about how God came into this world as a baby, the most vulnerable creature, God became disabled to save us from ourselves. And I don't know how much time I have here, but I know that God spent 33 years on this planet, and then he died on that cross and came back so that we might all have access to something greater than this. And we should all have access to democracy. Democracy is a human right, and nothing should stand in the way of it. Definitely not a crime that you committed so that you could live, so that you could feed your family, so that you could do what you needed to do to get by. So I'm thankful for today. I'm thankful for us being here. And I think I've used up 10 minutes. I'm not sure. I might have used up more. But if you guys do have questions for me, I'll be happy to answer any of them. And my book, Keep Up the Good Fight, includes everything that I had to share at that time when I wrote it. And there's a lot more that is coming, but I'm grateful just for this opportunity to share with you guys about this. And being disabled is not something that anybody has to feel bad about. We're all remarkable. Keep up the good fight.
All right. Thank you, Davon. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Thank you so very much. So we actually had we had questions that came in over the group, and also several were sent to me individually. So we actually have a fair amount of questions to ask. So thank you everyone for doing that. There's a question for the entire group. How does the impact of stigma regarding disabilities impact Black folk who are suffering from those disabilities? What's the impact of the stigma? How are they impacted? I don't know if we want to have a volunteer to begin. Okay, well, Davon, I'm going to single you out only because, you know, I know from yesterday's practice session that you had some direct knowledge and awareness to that question. So if you could lead us off, I'd appreciate that.
Stigma is slimy. Stigma is stinky.
Yeah.
Stigma is not somewhere you want to be. Stigma is an ugly word. It's a ugly way to feel. It's somebody making you less than. You don't want to be seen as a felon or a prisoner or somebody that doesn't have sense, somebody that's dangerous, somebody that's not all the time. Some people want to be seen as somebody dangerous. Our community has some learning to do still, you know. But stigma when it comes to disabilities, oh man, being differently able is something that my family never wanted to accept at all. I mean, when I was a kid, and that's another word that we shouldn't use because kids are goats, they're animals. We don't want to be herded into little rooms, a whole lot of people. But when I was young, and I could talk about discipline in kindergarten, even before the Head Start in Chester, Pennsylvania, where I was born. My mouth got washed out with soap, and I didn't cuss. It was an injustice. My first experience with injustice. I didn't cuss. The boys at the table said that I cussed. and I ended up having to get my mouth washed out with soap. This is in the 90s, early 90s. Then kindergarten, I had a teacher, Miss Cummings. She smacked little kids across their faces, little black boys, little white lady. She shook us. Kindergarten. First grade, Miss Duffy threw little boys in the dark closets. She had timeout spaces that she put us in.
Mhm.
If she didn't send us to the principal. Principal was like my aunt, but she didn't send us there all the time, Miss Duffy. Miss Duffy's another white teacher. But when I think about stigma, when I got to a school that was all white pretty much, my mom moved us up to Berks County, Pennsylvania. I went to Governor Mifflin. They wanted to put me in special classes. My behavioral problems didn't have a, they couldn't figure it out. They wanted to put me on medication. My mom wasn't for it. And I'm glad that she wasn't for it. But stigma, we don't want to be for it. We don't want to accept it. We don't want to have it. So first grade, I'm at the white school. Second grade, I'm still there. I'm walking in the market with my mom, and a Michael Jackson song's playing on the radio. And at the time, when I'm in second grade, it's 1995. Michael Jackson was going through his cases with the young people. And we had already decided in second grade, me and my other 7-year-old friends, other little boys, little white boys, we had decided that Michael Jackson was gay. And we didn't like Michael Jackson because he was gay. And when that song was playing, I said, I don't like Michael Jackson, he's gay. And my mom looked down at me and she told me that she was gay. And the music stopped.
Mhm.
Everything changed for me. This is my mom. So stigma, and what comes with stigma, the word stigma, it's more than a word, it's a feeling, it's a state of shock, it's a place of transition, maybe. I think it's usually just stopping. It's not growing, it's stopping.
Thank you, Davon, for that very touching and personal explanation. Thank you. Want to ask that same question still to Joann, Shannon, or Lisa, if you have any experiences of how the stigma for Black folk who suffer from disabilities, how are they impacted? Do you have any
Well,
insight into
I'm
that?
probably the oldest one of the bunch. But I remember very clearly as a child, if we were, I don't know, out somewhere and there was a child like in a wheelchair, and we're like, Mom, what's that? We didn't understand what that was. We didn't know what it meant. And what we were told is, don't stare. Well, of course, I mean, nobody wants to be stared at, but at the same time, it's like, if somebody looks at me and they like quickly look away, it's like, what are you telling that person? That you're ugly, or you shouldn't be seen. For me, stigma, I mean, I obviously cannot speak to what it is for a Black person to feel that, but I equated stigma with separation. It's like, okay, if they've got that thing, whatever it is, then they need to be over here and I should be over here. And I learned by about age 7 or 8 that was also called segregation, because I was born in the 50s. And so I grew up with that. And to me, stigma and segregation were like the same thing in my 7-year-old mind. And even then I knew it was wrong, but the grown-ups were doing it. And this is the thing, grown-ups still talk this kind of smack to their kids, whether it's about because they're gay, because they're Black, because they're Hispanic, because they're disabled, because whatever label they've put on them. And, you know, it's gotta stop. It's tolerated. People don't speak up when somebody says a slur of some kind, or they try and stigmatize someone. You know, everybody gets like all comfortable, but nobody says anything, and that has to stop. But even with little kids, I see it now because I work with these special ed cases that we see. And, you know, these kids do so well if you just leave them alone. You know, they don't see that. They think, cool, what can you do with that chair? I mean, they're fascinated, you know, they don't see it. It's, you know, it's a superpower. It's something magical that they have. And left to their own devices, kids are just so much more accepting. They have learned to hate and to dislike and to segregate from grown-ups. They don't come by it naturally. And that's on all of us. And I hope it stops before I leave this planet, but it's been very hard to watch throughout my lifetime. And because I've lived all over the world and seen it, whether they were Hindu or Buddhist or Black or female or gay, or people get stigmatized, and nothing good has ever come from stigma. Nothing.
Okay.
Only
Correct.
pain.
Thank you. Thank you, Joann, for your insights. I appreciate that. While since you're talking, there were several questions for both you and Lisa. For Lisa, I want to ask you one that came up from one of our listeners. If you could type in some of those names of the programs that you'd mentioned when you were talking and just throw those into the chat, that would be excellent. If you would, please. And
Sure,
then
I'll do that for you now.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that. And then while you're doing that, if you can kind of listen in the background, there was another question here, and I'm just going to read the whole thing out. I am a poll worker in Delaware and a retired RN. I identify myself to the team as available to assist. A PAR friend is welcome to be in the voting booth to assist the individual. In any site I have been assigned to, accessibility by wheelchair has been good, or there is an elevator to use. However, being alone in the booth to vote is sometimes not possible with the need for assistance from a family member or a friend. This can make some people uncomfortable. So is this private and independent? Are there any like legal concerns?
The right to privacy and independence belongs to the voter. If the voter decides they want help, they want somebody in the booth with them, that's up to them. I mean, that's completely their choice. If they haven't brought someone with them of trust, and they say they need help, what polling staff are supposed to do, and I know training varies from county to county, unfortunately, they're supposed to first try to assist without going in. The other thing is, if they have to go into the curtain, there has to be two, one Republican, one Democrat, so that there's no question of prejudice. But they should ask the voter to darken the screen so they can't see what's on the screen. And just say, show me where to, where is the slot to put the card? Or, ask the operational question, give them the answer, point to it, and go out. You don't stay while they vote, unless you are specifically asked to. But it has to be the choice of the voter.
Okay, thank you.
The new machines make it less likely, less necessary to have help because there's so many more accessibility features, but still people get in there and they forgot or they just need help, but it has to be their choice. They're in control.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Joann. I appreciate that. For the person who asked that question, does that answer, do you have any follow-up questions at all? If so, please go ahead and post them into the chat. I will move on to the next question that we have for both Lisa and Joann. And this was 2 more questions. So how do people get in contact with the organization for help? I know you had those phone numbers that you posted earlier. Can they go to their website? Are there other means?
Sorry, didn't unmute. Yeah, I mean, we've got, I'm happy to put up the phone numbers for all 3 offices. We have receptionists that are bilingual. And that's like the first point of call. You tell them like what your call is about, and then they'll do a small, like an intake, and then refer you to the right department.
Okay.
So you can't like call us directly, but those numbers are all there. I'm happy to share them. On election day, you can call me directly.
Right. And then question, okay, if you actually, from your slide, I don't know if you can copy and paste out from that one slide and just put that into the chat, if that's a possibility. That way, if there are people here who want to do something about that, they can. Continue to share. And then I have one last question for your group, and then I have one for Shannon and one for Davon. And actually, this one's from me. So when you're talking about voting rights can only be revoked by a judge's order, how is that so many people who are imprisoned are denied voting rights? Because I don't hear about, massive move to make sure that people who are in prison get their opportunity to have their voices heard. Or do I
And
misunderstand?
I know very well this issue. They do have the right to vote in most circumstances. If they're in detention because they've been convicted, it depends on the crime. There are certain felonies for which people will never regain their right to vote, but that's not the case. People who are in jail who have not committed a felony that's not like rape, murder, or bribery of a public official, are the three main categories, they do have the right to vote. The problem is with the Department of Corrections not informing a prisoner. Like when they do the intake, they're not telling people who are going to be incarcerated that they still have the right to vote. They don't make the registration cards available to them. They don't allow anybody to come in and do registration or help with registration or help with absentee ballots. We could do all that, and we're in discussions with the Department of Corrections, but so far it has been a battle we continue to fight. And not just us, ACLU, the whole Voting Rights Coalition has been having meetings with the DOC for a while. And now I understand the director just stepped down. There's a new person. I don't know what that will mean for our talks. I'm hopeful, but I've learned also sometimes not to get my hopes up.
Okay.
They do have the right. They have not lost the right to vote.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I know I see Davon, I see your hand. I also see Lisa's hand. Before I get
I'm
to
just gonna add in,
Yeah,
not
go ahead.
just, there's lawsuits against DOC right now because of them impeding and just, what's the word that we use for voter suppression?
voter suppression.
People that are justice impacted in Delaware have the right to vote. People that have felony convictions have the right to vote. Part of SB 180, Senator Kyle Evans-Gay's bill that I lifted up earlier, is taking away that exception for murder, rape, and committing a crime in public office, so that even those people will be allowed to vote. Because when there is when there's a separation, when some people can't and some people can, people just believe that they can't, so they don't try. They're not going to get registered because historically people with felony convictions couldn't vote. But since 2016 in Delaware, people with felony convictions, people that might have accepted a stolen vehicle, maybe they got into a car that wasn't theirs, maybe they sold drugs, whatever it was, they have the right to vote. So we just got to let them know. And there hasn't been a bill that has a fiscal note that would put billboards out there. There hasn't been a bill that, or even these organizations, C.L.A.S.I, I'm not sure exactly what you guys feel about this, but I think that it would be great if there was some funding that was used to make some ads out on the DART buses, make some ads on the stops, put some commercials on DETV. If people knew, because so many people don't know, they might vote, but it starts with awareness.
Thank you for making that distinction. if you're convicted of a felony and you're still inside, you don't get to vote. It's only once you have served your term, correct?
Yeah, right now, if you're sentenced and you can't vote. Even people on probation until this bill goes into effect can't vote. That's the confusion that stops people from doing what they can do, should do, but they can't. It's got to go away.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right. Lisa, I know your hand is up, but before we do that, I want to ask Michelle, do you have any questions to ask?
I have a
Some of my
question for Mrs. King,
questions
too.
were being answered because one of my greatest questions is about voting. And classy, Joann, I was really impressed with what you were saying in terms of your advocacy and meeting with this group. But this group has been meeting for a while. There is no law in the book that says if you're convicted of murder, you can't vote. It says if you're convicted of murder, you go to jail and serve a sentence. And yet nobody has been able to break through. Unfortunately, I think it's part of the old national plan. You do voter oppression in any way you can. You know, if it was the early 1900s, you had people in Mississippi read the Constitution. If they couldn't read, then they couldn't vote. Well, here, one way we got in reducing Black people eligible for votes is excessive internment or incarceration. You know, you keep a lot of Black voters in jail, you keep a lot of Black voters with these felony sentences, and you're guaranteed that those are permanent non-voters. And I don't know if any of us ever get to look at, there is intentional purpose to continue the old ways under some of these rulings. So while you all are meeting and pleading for a lady who was hired to be the head of DOC, you have to ask the question why the governor, why the general legislators don't step in and say, hey, they have every right to vote. But it's politics. Politics is in it somewhere. And that's the sad thing. But that's one of
law
the
that takes away the vote. It's a statute, actually. It's in the Delaware Code for elections that limits who can vote depending on the type of conviction. So it is on the books, but
is it constitutional? The question is it constitutional? Can you say, because you murdered someone, you lose your citizenship? Because not being able to vote is losing your citizenship. Think about it.
The issue is that voting is done by the states, not by the national government.
Right.
Each state has decided, and although to my knowledge, it hasn't been, constitutionality of it has not been challenged in Delaware, I believe it has in other states, and they have not been successful. That said, states with larger majorities of like-minded legislators have passed legislation to restore the vote to felons. I mean, it doesn't matter what you did or whether you served, but everybody gets the right to vote. It has happened in other states, but it is a state-by-state effort. At the moment, I don't think there's enough people to support it. Unfortunately, I'm sad to say.
The question is, Mrs. King, not is it constitutional, but is it moral? It's not moral. It's
not moral.
Immoral.
No.
But it is constitutional because it's written into the law. It's written into the policy. That's what they do when they are trying to pass something that is progressive, that the Democrats want down in Dover. They make these caveats in the legislation. They write that people that have committed murder and people that have committed rape or molestation, people that have committed a crime in public office and been convicted of it. These are the three things that stop people that have committed crimes from being able to vote.
But Davon, that's in our code. That's in our criminal code. The criminal code is not our constitution.
No, it's written into the law. It's policy.
Yeah, but that's not the constitution. That's the law. Well, it's okay. We don't need to get into it now. It's just something that I hope the advocates will keep pushing
It's
for.
something that we had to write a Senate bill. Senator Kyle Evans-Gay, who's also the head of the Judiciary Committee, she had to write a bill that has to be passed and has to go into effect still in order for people that have committed those crimes to be able to vote.
Yeah.
And for me, I believe that it just takes away the confusion and it takes away the people that it allows people that would vote, that could vote if they could, to be able to exercise their right. When you're thinking that you can't because some people can't, maybe nobody will. A lot of people won't because of that. So that needs to go away. Because of this conversation, it shouldn't. We shouldn't take so much time
That's
talking
true.
about it. It shouldn't be this confusing.
It's true. Since Court
Yep.
gave me the opportunity, Court, let me ask one more question. I wanted to ask
for
it
it.
of Lisa. Lisa, the Alliance, Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, gets at least a weekly phone call from somebody who's incarcerated, usually from Vaughan, saying, I'm not trying to get out of here. I'm just trying to understand why I'm here and why my sentence is so long. But I have no legal person to turn to. I always have to write back and say, the Alliance doesn't have any legal, we don't have any lawyers. And I always want somebody to refer them to. So I thought, could you and I have a discussion soon about what ways C.L.A.S.I can respond to some of these phone calls? Because they're frequent. I get them from not only the incarcerated individual, I get them from their mothers, their girlfriends, saying, we don't understand. One example is a young man was supposed to be released on January 2nd. Come January 2nd, no one came to release him. So he asked, and they, according to him, punished him for even asking. So then his mother called, and anyway, no one ever released him.
And I'm happy to participate in conversations related to that. C.L.A.S.I does not do any, our lawyers do not practice criminal law, but much of what we do intersects with the criminal justice system. And so we frequently have clients who are incarcerated or are somehow entangled in the legal justice system. And so happy to talk with you a little bit about that.
Okay.
And I just wanted to share also related to that and related to the voting piece. One small thing that Joann and I and some other colleagues of ours at C.L.A.S.I were able to do during the elections was to be in the Jane E. Mitchell building, which is the forensic unit at the Delaware Psychiatric Center. And typically, the individuals that reside in that building are going to change frequently because they bring them in for mental health evaluation and then competency restoration. And so the population of individuals changes frequently, but many of those individuals are people of color. And we were able to go in for the last 2 general elections and assist the majority of people there to cast a vote, to educate them about their right to vote, to talk with them about how to exercise the right to vote, to assist them in registering, and to help them cast an absentee ballot. And
Great.
so we continue to do that. And it's a small step forward, but I think it's an important one because they will hopefully go out and educate others as well about their experience with voting. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Okay. And I know we're pushing time. I know, Davon, you have a question, and there's still a couple of questions to ask. I don't know if we'll get to them. I know that Hope does have a comment she'd like to make before we have our closing discussion from Charlotte. So let me just, Hope, let me go to you first, if you would, please.
Hi, I'm a child of the 60s, and I grew up with when I went to school, there were children in our schools that had disabilities. The problem was, it goes to what Joann was saying, the isolation and segregation. We knew that those children were there, but they were kept in a little room way down at the other end of the school, in the little classroom that had no windows. We might see them out on the playground playing with each other. We might see them in the cafeteria, in their little cluster. And that is the example that we and those of our generation had of what it meant to provide provide for the needs of people with disabilities, or they were institutionalized and we never saw them except that they came home for vacation. And I remember that, but I am a child of a deaf adult. So to me, disability has always been a part of my life. To me, it's a natural thing. And so I spent my life working with people with disabilities until I acquired my own and got to see what it felt like from the other side. I know that I am privileged in that area because I had the work experience to know what my rights were in education and even banking for accommodation, or going to an event arena and knowing that my mother has a right to an interpreter, or going to a medical center and knowing that they cannot exclude me out of the room when my deaf mother is going to have a medical procedure or speak with a doctor or a nurse. The problem that I've seen is that people that have disabilities and those that do not are not aware of what the rights are, the human rights that everybody should have, that apply to people with disabilities, nor have they been exposed to person first language or the etiquette that comes with interacting with people with disabilities. And that's what drove me to try to get this webinar going, to get the information out to the marginalized groups, because every way that disability intersects takes us another rung down that ladder we're trying to climb. So add that I'm a woman, that takes me down a step. Add that I'm a Black woman, that takes me down a step. If there's any different sexual orientation, it's going to take me down another step. Meanwhile, disabilities got me not even able to get up the ladder. I can get up the ladder. I've had successful outcomes. I want successful outcomes for everybody. And part of that depends on us getting the information out to all groups, especially the most marginalized. And I need to thank Curt and I need to thank Miss Charlotte for allowing us this platform. I'm grateful, and I'm hoping it touches many and starts to affect some change in our communities.
Thank you, Hope, and I want to thank you for bringing it, making us give it a priority and show it off. And I want to thank Curt for making it
Agreed.
part of our monthly agenda. And I especially want to thank our panelists. I learned a lot tonight from all of you. So I really appreciate it. Appreciate hearing from all of you. And it's such a nice, different group in terms of coming from different places. But I think that the whole problem of disability, whether it's within the Black community or any place, is so large. Think about the fact that since pre-Christ, when you had leprosy, you all would chase down to, you didn't deal with leprosy, you hid them. And throughout civilization, we have always hidden the disabled in mental hospitals, wherever, in back rooms with locks on them in their own families' houses. Disability is just something that's going to do more than just information. It's the same kind of healing that we look for with racial justice issues. We can put all the information we want out there about racial justice, about racism. And people need to evolve, and that's a long-term process, but we'll keep working on it. But thank you, Hope. And I hope we'll have another a follow-up to this wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank all of you for your time and for teaching all of us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hope. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate all of your support and in participating in our July town hall.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye now.
Good night.
See you all.
Right. Thank you for the
Bye.
opportunity.
I had a question for Classy.
Oh, let's do it real quick. I know,
Ms.
apologies, Davon.
Furber. It's the most important question, I guess. I did want to say something to Mrs. King. They mentioned that I do work with Multi-Faith EMI, which is out of Ebenezer Church, Senator Warnock's church, Dr. King's church. Christine King, who is Dr. King's oldest sister, survivor, she's passed away, and they're having funeral services for her all week long. And I thought about that name, that name, Miss King. But Mrs. Furber, I did want to ask, how many people that were in the mental health realm of DOC voted back in 2022? Because ACLU says that there was only 3 people that voted that were in confinement, that were in DOC.
So I'm gonna also ask Joann to help because we did it as a collaborative effort. At that time, I was working as the primary advocate for individuals with mental illness and spent a lot of my time working at the Delaware Psychiatric Center. But I think we had probably a total of 42 people that voted. And of those 42, about half of those individuals were at the Mitchell building. And of that number of individuals, probably between 3/4 and 7/8 of those people, I wish I could give you, if I had anticipated, I could have given you a direct number, but probably 18 of those people weren't people who are Black or Hispanic or Asian.
They didn't include those people in the prison population. They don't include them.
And I'm not sure
Ms.
why.
Kingsley,
I
I don't
mean,
know why.
the Mitchell building is it's an interesting hybrid of the Department of Corrections and mental health. So it falls under the Delaware Psychiatric Center, but it is also a level 5, detention facility. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Joann, or if you can
No,
correct.
you've got it right. I just wanted to clarify that we were at DPC, or Psychiatric Center, and not at the prison per se. So the 2 votes, and actually I think they sent out 2 forms and got 1 or maybe none even back. The ones that we were successful in registering and assisting to vote were at DPC, Delaware Psychiatric Center, where all of them were in pre-trial detention. Is that right, Lisa?
No,
Oh,
well,
okay.
some of them would have been already sentenced. Some of them were guilty but mentally ill. Some were not guilty by reason of insanity. Some were there for competency evaluation and restoration, so they hadn't been. So there was a whole continuum of where they were on their criminal justice journey, or as far as sentencing. But certainly it was well more than 2 people, and why they wouldn't have included those individuals, I don't know.
I don't know if they know. I think that it's just something to communicate with them. If you could tell Dwayne, Mr. Kingsley.
I think that's
he knows.
a great question to ask
Well,
Dwayne.
he's the one that told me that there was only 3 people.
Court, I'm gonna
that
have to leave.
voted in
I've got another meeting.
2022.
Okay,
As far as I know, he was speaking only of the facility in Smyrna.
Okay. right. You guys have a good night. Keep up the good fight.org.
Night, everybody.
Right.